the Motivational Cowboy, Johnny D.
This is Johnny D, the Motivational Cowboy, with this week's episode of Outstanding Life Podcast. The episode title, Life at 300 Miles Per Hour with my friend Jim O. After all these years of knowing you, hanging out with you, I finally get you in the studio for a podcast. What's up, buddy?
Man, not much, Johnny D. This is awesome, man. I love coming here and checking your place out. This is great.
Man, I tell you what, I don't know, I was trying to think of today, it's been over 10 years. I don't know if it's 10, 15 years I've known you. And, you know, we always get together a couple times a year. You're always so busy. 30-some years in the drag racing business. 30 years. I mean, that is like, that's almost your whole life, man. I mean, I don't think you know anything else than drag racing. How in the heck does a man get into drag racing? I mean, I know your dad did it, and I don't know if he did it professionally or if he did it kind of for fun, but your family was in the business. So then, is that where you got the niche or the hook, the feeling to get into the business?
Yeah, my dad raced back in the the late 50s, 60s, and early 70s.
Now, when you say race, was he a race car driver, or what did he work on them like you?
Well, he did both. He drove and he worked on the cars. And the last time he drove, he actually crashed the car, but he didn't want to tell my mom about it. But my mom found out about it from a neighbor the next morning, and that was the end of my dad's driving career. But as a kid, my dad would drag myself and my brother to the drag races, and as a small kid, I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with Top Fuel dragsters, with nitro funny cars, and just the sound, the awesomeness of what a fuel car is was just something that just I wanted to be involved in for my whole life.
How many? Let's say we're going back to what, you were 5, 6, 7 years old, maybe. How many horsepower were those nitro cars putting out back then? Would you just guess?
I would say probably when I started going to the races, they were probably around 1,500 to 2,000 horsepower, maybe.
And when you got out of the business, how many horsepower were they running then? 8,000, 9,000?
About 11,000
horsepower.
horsepower.
Holy cow, are you kidding me?
No.
Holy cow. Oh, man. So listen, the first time that I was at a NHRA event was, I'm going to go back here. I know it's probably 19 years ago, 20 years ago. There is something about the cloud of nitro that makes you cry. Literally, I'll never forget my friends that going, hey, yeah, move up there. And I'm like, why do these people have masks on? And I'm over here right in the middle of it. And all of a sudden, my eyes start watering. What is it that makes a person look like a big baby, even though they're an adult?
Well, the nitromethane, and it boggles my mind with all the EPA stuff going on and everything that they even allow us to do this. But I remember as a kid going to the races and with my brother, and we would sit there behind a funny car that was warming up. And I remember it was Roland Leon's Hawaiian Punch car. They were warming up this car.
I remember that car.
Yeah, and they were warming it up on alcohol, and everybody's standing there, and and then all of a sudden we're like, we're going to get a good seat now. As soon as they switch it over to nitro, it's going to fog everybody out, right? So my brother and I, we're small, and we're just sitting there waiting. And the next thing you know, they switch it over to nitromethane, and it cleared everybody out. And my brother Jono and I, we had a front row seat to them warming up the Hawaiian Punch car. And I don't know what it is about it, but it is some gnarly stuff when you get that fog, and it definitely can make a grown man cry.
It's crazy. So take me back to you growing up, wanting to get in the business, and then getting the chance to actually do it. Like at what age did you, because I'm sure you went to high school, right? Did you go to college?
A little bit.
Okay, so you're just like me.
Exactly.
Yeah. So,
I attempted it.
Hey, it's either, yep, I went to school and then got my master's degree, or it's, yeah, and that's where I know somebody went for almost a year or less.
Exactly.
And that was me.
Yep.
So you go through, your family's racing, your stuff like that. You get the bug. were you doing stuff for free for other people in the business just to be around it? Because me being around the racing side of things with NASCAR, people always say, they're like, man, I was mopping floors. I was doing whatever I could just to be around a team. Because you never know when an opportunity presents itself, and you out of sight, out of mind. But if you're there, they're like, hey, you come here.
Yeah. And for me, like as a young kid growing up, when I go to the races with my dad, it was, working on his car, or I don't know if we'll really call it working, but it was just kind of being in the way, and maybe, cleaning a drain pan out or something like that. But, the first time that I probably was able to work on a car and I felt like, wow, this is something really cool. And it was back in, 1982, my dad took us to the Cajun Nationals down in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And, that's where, I met, Connie Kalitta and Scott Kalitta for the first time. And, my dad's real good friend, Ron Barrows, was the crew chief for Connie Kalitta back then. So Ron allowed, my brother and I to, clean pans and things like that. But it was really cool because you were part of a team, you felt like back then. And it was crazy back then. But I thought, man, this would be pretty neat if I could do this more.
Right.
So, as time went on, I started getting more interested in it. And my dad, we had a paint and body shop back in Dallas, Texas. And right around the corner from my dad's shop was the Blue Max race team.
Oh, wow.
And those guys were big time, Raymond Beadle and everybody. And then there were Chaparral Trailers that was there. It's where all the big dogs got their trailers built. But my dad, we had a guy that worked for us named Morris McDonald. I call him Motown. And he worked on Frank Cook and Chuck Lander's Drag-On Charger alcohol funny car. So they had a shop right around the corner, and I would go there at night and I would scrape rubber from underneath the body, polish wheels, do whatever.
How old were you?
I was about 16 at the time. And I just thought it was so cool to do that. And then I started going to the races with these guys.
Yeah.
And it was
like locally?
Yeah, locally.
Okay.
Well, Texas is a big state.
Right.
So I remember the first race I went to with them was down in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and we drove all night, Friday night, drove down these 2-lane roads with God knows what on the side of the road. Yeah. And we pulled into Baton Rouge racetrack that morning, Saturday morning. And I remember I turned the truck off, and because I drove the truck because I'm like, oh, I could drive. And they're like, really? And I never drove anything with a trailer on it. So we drive, and I turn the thing off. And back then it was a Chevy crew cab, and it had the big block Chevy in it. They're like, oh, don't turn it off, because they had headers on it. And then the headers got by the starter and heated the starter up. So then I had to crawl underneath there and beat on it with a hammer and to get the thing started again. But it was just so much fun. And
was that weekend that you went to Baton Rouge? Was that the first time you actually got away and spent the night in a hotel for work?
Yeah, that was probably the first time for me that I went there. My dad didn't go with me. My brother didn't go with me. It was just me. And I went with Frank Cook and Chuck Landers and Morris and Tuna. Cool. and we just had a grand old time. And it was like so much fun. And it was just like something, man, I've got to do this more.
Right. So the next step was for you to do what?
Well, I helped with Frank and Chuck for a while, and then I got hooked up with a guy named Jay Meyer out of Freeport, Texas. He had an alcohol dragster, and he wanted me to come work on his car, and I painted his car for him and did some things. So I traveled around with him in 1987, him and his wife and the 4 kids, I believe it was, and same thing. We just had a lot of fun, and Jay had the ability to be a little bit more competitive. He had some pretty nice equipment that he had, and it was fun going to the races with him and having the ability to have a car that could possibly win a race. And he taught me a lot because it was really just him and I working on the car, and it was a good learning experience for me.
So you said you worked with your dad, but you wanted to get into racing. At what point did you have to go to your dad and say, "Hey, Dad, I love you. This is a great deal, but I got to move on to something bigger and better here, and I have an opportunity"?
Well, I remember in late 1987, I talked to Scott Kalitta and I asked Scott, what the chances were of me being able to come work for him. And he just kind of looked at me like, I think in his mind he was thinking like, yeah, slim and none. But I kept bugging him. And then the next year.
But Scott, what was, and I'm interrupting you for a minute because Scott had a tendency to not act so nice the way that you just said it. So did he really say it just that nicely? Like, hey, listen, I'll think about it. Because Scott spoke his mind, and you knew exactly what Scott was thinking all the time.
Yeah, but he beneath his rough exterior, he was really a good-hearted, human being. And
absolutely, he was.
And he cared about people. Sometimes, he was one of those guys that you had to know to understand. And not a lot of people ever really took the time to get to know him.
Yep.
And I was very fortunate that I spent a lot of time with him. I mean, he stayed at my mom and dad's house, and, him and I went on a lot of trips together as far as, driving down the road, going to these races and things like that. But
so you finally asked him, and he gave you a chance?
Yeah, I finally, at the beginning of the 1988 season, he came to me. He says, "Hey, I have an opening. Are you interested?" And I about tripped over myself. I said, "Why, sure." And I went to my dad, and I told my dad, I said, "I'm going racing with Scott." And he's like, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." I said, "This is what I want to do." I think my dad thought that I wouldn't last very long, that I might do this for, 3 to 6 months, and then I'd be knocking on his door wanting to get back into the paint and body shop. But, I was bound and determined that this was something that I wanted to do. And being able to race with Scott was something that was, for me, was a dream come true, because I'd gotten to know Scott previously before that for about 5 years, and had taken we'd gotten to become friends and things like that. So it was really cool for me to be able to go work for him, and he was probably one of my first and most important mentors I ever had early on in drag racing.
What would you say would be your favorite track that you have ever been to? Now, I don't mean just NHRA drag racing. I mean just racetracks.
I would say for me, Topeka, Kansas always kind of held a special place in my heart, because we were so successful there as a race team for so many years. And that's where, I was with Scott when he won his first Top Fuel race there. It was with, David Grubnick was part of the team when he won his first race there. Hillary Will,
gosh, that just brought back a lot of memories right there.
Did very well with Doug Kalitta there. I also think that, probably not tops on everybody's list, but like for me, both the Houston racetrack and the Dallas racetrack are pretty special to me. Houston, because that was the first place that I was ever part of a win with Scott Kalitta. It was Scott Kalitta's very first NHRA national event win, and first one for me as a young crew member at the time. And then Dallas was very special to me. The first time my daughter ever came to a race, and she was spoiled back in 1995, the year she was born. She came to the Dallas race, and Scott Kalitta, he won that race that weekend, and we also clinched the world championship that weekend. So that was pretty big for me. And then going back there in 2013, it was the first race that we had won after my late wife Tammy passed away.
Right. So you've got to meet so many people over 30 years in this business. And I was going through some stuff today, and I was writing a list of questions down, and I was like, wait a second. I am not the only cowboy in your life. So talk about the relationship that you have, and who I'm talking about is Cowboy Bob. You and him, I know that he was, he was a sponsor, but he's also a really good friend of yours. How did that relationship, come about? Because I know that you meet so many people, it's hard to get close to everybody that you come in contact with, but there is a special bond that you two have.
Cowboy Bob, he is my brother from another mother. He is a guy that has had my back through thick and thin. He's a guy that has always been straight up and honest with me. If you know,
he's a big dude. Did he play football or was he ever like a wrestler? I've always wondered that.
He played football and stuff.
Oh, he did.
Yeah,
okay, because he's a big dude.
He's a big dude. Yeah, he's very big. And you know, he's a wonderful human being, and he's always like, if he saw me screwing up something, he'd call me out. You know, he would you know, straighten me out, or he would, you know, try to help me out. Or if I have had a personal problem, personal question, I can always talk to him, you know, like a brother. And, you know, in the same way with him, you know, he calls me up for things. But how I met Cowboy Bob, of all things, you know, and
because he lives in Vegas, right?
He lives in Vegas. He's a big Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and so am I. So we had a mutual friend of ours named Garen Suhu, and Garen told Cowboy Bob, he says, "Hey, you have to meet Jimmo because he is a big Steeler fan." So he brought Cowboy Bob over to our pit area, and so here's this humongous guy, cowboy hat and everything, and he's got this humongous Pittsburgh Steeler belt buckle on. And I go, "Man, that's a cool belt buckle." Well, he took his whole belt off with the belt buckle and gave it to me. He says, "Here, it's yours," you know, and
wow.
And we just hit it off right after that. And, you know, we've been friends for, you know, about 20 years now, and he's, just an amazing guy, you know, and he's experienced many ups and downs in his life as well. And, you know, the one thing about him is he always, you know, always seems to have a positive message for somebody, no matter what.
Every time I've ever met him, he is definitely the glass is half full kind of guy.
Yes.
Would you say then the key to your success would be keeping good people around you? Would that be like a life lesson that you would share to somebody else? Because being in the business for 30 years, I'm sure that there are people that came into your life that you wish they never came into your life. And then there's other people that you start to keep just a close niche group of people around you because you know that they are going to help you go to that next level.
Yeah, I think that the people you surround yourself with are very important for many things, whether it's on the personal side, the business side, and whatever it may be, because they're around you all the time. And one of the things that I've tried to do with myself, no matter what, is I try to look at the good in people, no matter what. So I don't want to focus on what they can't do. I want to focus on what they can do. I don't want to focus on what's bad about them. I want to focus, you know, what's good about them. And you know, so for me, you know, having that right group of people around you, having people that aren't negative all the time, that bring something positive to the table, I feel makes me a better person moving forward.
Talking about friends and family, let's talk about your brother, Jono. He's another one of those guys that I think the world of myself. I don't get to see you guys all the time, but he's always upbeat. He always says hello. You guys working together as long as you have, it's your brother. It's blood. But sometimes you were competing against each other as well. What was that like, having your brother around you for so long?
Well, I was very, very blessed to be able to work with my brother for really about 28 years.
Yeah.
You know, at Kalitta Motorsports. And I'm very proud of him, you know, because, you know, being the older brother, there's always that thing of, you know, the little brother lives in the shadows of, you know, his big brother and stuff. But, you know, I'm very proud of what, you know, he's done in the sport of drag racing and what he's accomplished. And he's very passionate about what he does. But the thing that I like about my brother, better than anything is how proud he is to be a dad, and how proud he is to be a husband, and how hard he works at being a good dad and being a good husband and being
it's tough to find balance.
It is. It's very tough to find balance, especially, you know, with that lifestyle.
Yep.
And but we had a lot of fun working together. We had our ups and downs. There were days we wanted to strangle each other.
I was just going to ask you, did you ever have those days of like you were working together, but then brothers always have those moments where you just want to punch each other out?
Oh yeah, we had a few of those, and the only guy that ever got in between us was Ed the Ace McCullough, and that was it. And Ace was like, "Guys, you don't want to do this," and then we thought better of it, and we're like, "All right, we won't because we're too old. You know, we can't be doing that anymore." But I love my brother. He's a great guy, and he does a great job running that car. And I'm right now, their DHL funny car with JR Todd, is competing for the funny car world championship. And, and I'm cheering them on. I hope they do a great job. I hope they pull it off, because for my brother, it'll be his second world championship as a funny car crew chief.
It's funny because every Sunday that I get home and you guys are on TV, I hurry up, I get off the airplane, I get in the car, I come home and I turn on and see what that team is doing right now. And I mean, they are having one of those incredible years. Talk about family, man. You met your wife. Did you meet Tammy in the racing business, or did you meet her outside of racing?
No, I met her in the racing business.
So,
and,
please tell, because I don't even know how you met her.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I knew her brother Tim. I knew of her sister Terry. I knew of her dad Keith and her mom Virginia, and I didn't even know Tammy existed at the time.
How old were you?
When I met Tammy, I was 21 years old.
Okay.
And I remember Scott Kalitta had hired Tammy to do PR for the Kalitta team. And
are you talking about back in the 80s for Scott and Connie?
Yeah, this was in 1989. And I tell you what,
that must have been one heck of a job for her.
Oh, that was I tell you what, it was not an easy thing to do PR for Connie and Scott back, because really, Connie sponsored the cars with his Kalitta Flying Service, and so it wasn't like they had to do a lot of PR. Yeah, but she treated them just like she was out there promoting any other top driver in the sport, and and then she worked on some marketing stuff for sponsors and things like that for the team, but she did a lot of things back then, and I didn't know who she was. And the next thing you know, Scott's walking with this good looking girl through the airplane hangar where our shop was back then. And I was like, wow, who's that? And then I was told, hey, well, that's Tim Farrell's sister, Tammy. I go, really? I said, I thought she was going out with Bubba Sewell. No, that's Terry. That's the other sister that's going out with Bubba Sewell. I go, oh, okay. So, I don't know. She just caught my eye. And
who made the first move?
That would be me. She would probably say it was her.
Because that's exactly how Tammy was. And that's why I asked you the question, because she's like, no, hell no. It was me.
Well, I tell you what, I've definitely thought like this woman is probably way too good for me. Yeah. And, and she was a little bit older than me. She was way smarter than me about, a lot of things. But, there was just something about her that I really liked. And then when I got to know her more, and then finally,
where was your first date? Don't tell me a racetrack.
Well, well, unfortunately back then, you're at the racetrack. But actually, I remember we were in Brainerd, Minnesota, and I asked her out to dinner, and we went out to a place, to dinner up there in Brainerd. I can't even remember because there wasn't much up there. So I think it was
another cool track.
Yeah, I think we were staying in one of those Maddens or something, and we went to a restaurant that was around there and stuff. But it was just went out and had a real nice time with her, and I just felt like there was just something about her that I really liked that I had never experienced before in my life.
So up until that point, it was all about racing. Then you meet Tammy. How long did it take you to say, will you marry me?
Well, we went out it was about 2 years.
Okay.
And, before we ended up getting married, I think how all this were, I remember Scott Kalitta, he had proposed to his future wife, Kathy. And I thought it was so cool because nobody ever thought Scott would get married. And I just thought it was really cool that they did this. And then I remember, they got married, I believe it was the following year. And, Scott was on me about, you need to ask Tammy to marry you. And then he kept asking me about, let me know if you want to go buy a ring and all that. And I'm like, so I wanted to do everything by myself.
Yeah.
So I went and, found a ring, for at Service Merchandise. Remember those places?
Yes, I do remember
they
that.
had credit. I got credit there, the whole deal. And every amount of credit I had there, which wasn't much, I bought this ring for Tammy. And, so I gave it to her on Christmas Day back in.
So how did you propose? Now I'm really curious. Take me back.
Well, I bought her a leather coat. Bought her this real nice leather coat at Wilson's Leather.
I remember that place too.
Yeah, and then I put the ring box in one of the pockets. So the next thing you know, she puts this coat on, and then she's putting her hands in the pocket, and then she pulls out this box, and she's like, well, what's this? I said, well, open it up. And she opened it up, and it was an engagement ring. And then I got down on my knee, and I asked her if she would marry me.
What'd she say?
And she said yes. And I was like, oh, shit. She said yes. So that later on that day, we actually went over to Scott and Kathy's house for Christmas dinner. And so, Kathy's all excited because, she heard that we got engaged.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then Scott starts bitching at me. He goes, you asshole, that ring you got is bigger than Kathy's, and now I got to go buy her another ring. And I'm like, well, you shouldn't have been so cheap. But he was so mad at me. But I was making payments on this ring. I don't think he made payments on his. He didn't have to. But it was just a really, cool time for me. And, back then, Tammy still went to all the races, so we spent a lot of time together.
Yeah. And then you start working together, right?
Yeah, we worked together at that time.
So what was that like? So not only were you married to this beautiful woman, you worked with her, like literally on the road, at home. Then you were with her at home. Like, how did that all happen? Or not how did it happen? How did it work out? Because I can't even imagine for the life of me ever finding a woman is going to be hard enough, but finding a woman that you can put up with 24/7, literally, because most men and women, they go to their jobs and they can communicate with other people and stuff like that. You couldn't. You were with this woman all the time. And as wonderful as she is, it's hard to spend that kind of time with somebody.
No, it is. And it was probably harder on her spending that much time with me, but, we just had back then, we just had a really simple life. It was just her and I, and, we enjoyed the races. We both grew up around the racetrack, so we both enjoyed that. So we basically took everything in. So we took everything in when we went to the racetrack together, when we left the racetrack together, when we were back home, back in Ypsilanti together. We really enjoyed our time that we had with each other.
Back then, were you a crew chief yet?
No, I was just a crew guy.
You were just a crew guy. So when you became a crew chief, things amp up a little bit more. How did that work out? One, you probably were excited for yourself, right? She was probably excited for you because that's something you've been dreaming about since you were 5 years old. You finally get the opportunity to be a crew chief on a car, but then you're still married and everything else. How did that all work out? Well,
when I was given the opportunity to be a co-crew chief with Connie Kalitta and on Doug Kalitta's car back in 2000, it was a dream come true for me because, I'm where I want to be. I'm working with Connie Kalitta. I mean, here's a guy that, a legend in the sport and done so many great things in the sport. And he's teaching me, he's teaching me about tuning a race car. He's teaching me about business and life in general. Yeah. So it was a humongous opportunity for me.
How did it happen? Because I know Connie a little bit. I've met him a few times, Did he just say, hey, come here, you want to be the crew chief? Well, or did he actually What was he molding you? Now that you look back on it, was he molding you to be that man to take over one day?
Well, at the end of 1999, Connie had made some changes within the team, and we had, some guys that had left the team and everything. And he came to me and he says, well, what do you want to do? I said, well, I want to stay here and work with you. And he's like, okay. And I said, I want to be a crew chief someday. And he told me, he says, well, I'd like to teach you. And I said, great. And so, I remember over the winter of 1999, NHRA, there was we used to be able to run unlimited nitro methane percentage. Well, over the winter, they decided that they were going to drop the nitro percentage down to a 90% maximum, which, that didn't set well with Connie. It didn't set well with a lot of people. And, I remember Connie was like, hell with this. I'll take Dougie and we'll go NASCAR racing, because Connie Kalitta and Jack Roush were good friends. And, so I'm like, oh man, here we are, finally get this opportunity. And Connie, we may be going and turning left, for all I know. But, so fortunately, Connie's passion for drag racing was there, and he, decided, we were going drag racing. And, I remember over the winter, he's like, we had the car and it ran really good at the last race of the year in Pomona. And he told me, he says, don't touch a thing with this car. Just leave it alone. I'm like, okay. Well, I'm like, man, if I'm ever going to be a crew chief, I really need to understand how all this stuff works on these cars. Because, for the longest time, I did cylinder heads, I built short blocks, I did ignition stuff. I did, a lot of different jobs on the car, but there were a lot of things, as much as I did, there were still a lot of things that I had no clue how they worked. So I remember I talked to my really good friend, Don Jackson, out in California, and I call him Pops. And I said, hey, Pops, I go, can you come back here to the shop and help me? Because he built a lot of the fuel valves and everything that we had on the cars. He's like, yeah. So he came back and stayed at my house, and we went into the shop on the weekend, and I stripped this car down to nothing.
Wait, I just want to make sure that I understand. The one that Connie told you not to touch?
Yeah, the one he told me not to touch. I stripped it down to nothing.
So there's pieces. I'm visualizing this right now. There's pieces all over the floor and everything of this hangar.
Oh yeah. It was our shop,
Okay.
So there's all this stuff. There's wiring. There's airlines. There's all this stuff all over it. And Connie comes in. He's like, "What in the world did you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm taking this car apart. I'm going to put it all back together." He goes, "Do you know where any of this stuff goes?" I'm like, "No," but I said,
I'm going to learn.
I'm going to learn. That's because I always felt like, if I'm going to learn, I need to take all this stuff apart.
Yeah.
And so I did that, and we, myself and Don Jackson, he showed me how to plumb everything, and as in relation to the fuel valves and everything. So we put all this stuff back together. And we went to Phoenix testing, and I'll never forget. I'm like, oh, please God, I hope all this stuff works. And we went testing, and the car started up, did a burnout, it did everything worked, and in the process, we took about 5 pounds off the car too. So that was even better yet.
Your first lesson as a crew chief, then, if you don't know something, you call somebody smarter than you, right?
Oh,
because you can't know everything about anything in life. You can't ever think that you have it all together. There's always somebody out there that knows a little bit more than you, correct?
Oh yeah. The day that I wake up in the morning and think I know everything is a day I really need to quit racing. And probably one of the best compliments I could ever give Connie Kalitta is, this is a guy that's been racing before I was ever born. Has probably forgot more about drag racing than I'll ever know. But if you ask him a question about something and he doesn't know, he will tell you, I don't know. Let's go find somebody who does know.
Yeah.
And that's what I always liked about Connie Kalitta more than anything. He wasn't a guy that was going to feed you a line to give you an answer that just to give you an answer.
Right.
He
kept it real.
He kept it real.
Yep.
And it was pretty cool.
So you're a crew chief now at this point. You're married at this point. I don't know this, and I hope that I'm not getting too personal with you, but I just know that in life, there are things that I have had to overcome because I was excited about my new job or my new career, and I would I'm getting goosebumps right now when I'm thinking about it. And it also pissed me off that I was like that, but I'm also glad I was like that because it made me who I am today. But I forgot about a lot of people because I gave my heart and soul into working my tail off to learn the business. I mean, and being a motivational speaker for 20 years, it's not like I woke up one day and I knew everything about speaking. It's a business. And I worked a lot of years and missed a lot of stuff to follow my dream. Did you ever get to that point, or did you always have balance?
No, I mean, exactly what you said. I mean, it hits the nail on the head for me. When I was given this opportunity to be a crew chief and working with Connie Kalitta and all these things, I was so excited about that opportunity, and I wanted to succeed so much because I didn't want to fail. I didn't want to fail at being a crew chief. I didn't want to let, Connie Kalitta down, or Doug Kalitta, or Scott Kalitta. I didn't want to let anybody down on that side. So I put all this effort into, working all these hours, and I acted like this is the only thing I had in my life.
Right.
And my wife, Tammy, she was so very supportive of me following my dream and becoming a crew chief. And she stood by me all this time. But while all this was going on, my passion for being a top-notch crew chief overtook my passion for being a good husband, a good dad, a good family man. And, and looking back on that, it's tough. And and there's times I curse myself out because I did this, and I did this for a long time. And it was always like the team was above everything else. And it shouldn't have been that way. And I could have if I could have changed things and put my wife and my family, my kid and everything top, I still could have done the same things being a good crew chief as well. But those are lessons that you learn in life, and it was a tough lesson.
She was definitely proud of you. So at what point did you and Tammy have your beautiful daughter? Because the one thing that I'll always remember the first time that I met you is the one thing that we have in common is we have a daughter about the same age. And we're both two very proud parents. And I like to say that, I'm proud that I can say that I'm a proud parent. You know what I mean? Because both of us could have took the other road and not been good dads. But we put our kids first. Do you remember when Tammy came home and she's like, "Hey, listen, I know you're working and everything else, but guess what? I'm pregnant."
Yeah, it was, and we had tried before then, and unfortunately, before Ashley was born, we had a miscarriage, and that was pretty devastating on Tammy, for a while because, at the time I was so looking forward. I wanted to be a dad, very, very bad. Well, then we tried, again, and Ashley, she was born, and, that was, probably for me, the most amazing day, in my life when she was born, because,
were you there?
I was there. Yeah. Thank God I was there.
Was it a weekend off? Is that why?
It was a weekend off. Yeah. We were racing in Memphis the weekend before, and I'm like, and Ashley was due that weekend, but just like her mom, Ashley liked to sleep a lot and was kind of procrastinating on getting out when she was supposed to get out. So a week later, she's still not born. I'm calling his doctor up. I'm like, what do we got to do to get this thing going?
Yeah.
Like we've got to induce her because I'm leaving for Englishtown in a few days. And I said, God, I said, I'm not going to miss this. So luckily, it was Mother's Day of all things, May 14th, 1995. And Ashley was born.
Wow.
And it was like the greatest day in my life. And I know it was probably the greatest day in Tammy's life as well too.
So you guys are married, you're working together, everything's good. So you think all of a sudden, years later, you get other news, and Tammy told you that she had cancer.
Yeah, I mean, it was, in beginning of 2012, and Tammy and I's relationship, we were struggling a little bit, because of work and the amount of time that we each put into work. Mm-hmm. And we put so much time into trying to do a good job, do our jobs well at work, that we didn't put much time into her and I,
right,
into our relationship. And we really just took each other for granted, at that time. And, and there was a point where I thought, where we both thought, like, are we, destined to be married forever? I didn't really know at that time. And I was, unfortunately, times like that, you always think the worst of everything. You don't think of, like, how do we get this relationship back on track? And, we were both pretty stubborn people at the time to, say, like, okay, we need help, or we need, I need to be a little bit more open-minded about certain things or whatever. We're,
it's probably not the way that we were raised.
Yeah.
Either.
It's just, it was just like, neither one of us wanted to admit we were wrong or anything like that. But, I remember at the beginning of 2012, she, started getting this cough and stuff. And it was, at the time for me, it was annoying. I'm like, you need to go to the doctor. You need to, so she goes to the doctor, and they tell her that, she's, they gave her some antibiotics and she should be fine or whatever. Well, then this cough didn't go away.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, you need to go back to the doctor, because this is ridiculous that this cough's still there. So she goes back, and then they tell her, like, well, you might have allergies, you might have this and that. And so then at that point, I'm telling her, like, you need to go see another doctor or something. Right. And, they had done x-rays of her lungs and everything back then. Well, I remember I was at the Houston race, and, I came back, and, I text her when I landed, and, most of the time she would come pick me up. And, so I text her, I said, hey, I just landed, can you pick me up? She says, no. She says, I'm at the emergency room at St. Joe's Hospital. I'm like, well, what are you there for? She says, well, I couldn't take it anymore. I, come and get myself checked out with this cough. So I'm like, okay. So, I text her and call her, and then, she says, well, they're admitting me because they say I have pneumonia. So, I get a ride back to the shop, get my car, and I drive up to St. Joe's Hospital, and they now admitted her into the hospital. And so the doctor came in and said he was going to do a lung cleaning, and, wanted to, check and make sure there was, no cancer or anything like that. And that was the first time I ever heard the word cancer, like, with my wife. And I'm like, well, there's no way that she can have cancer.
Right.
So we had a race the very next weekend in Atlanta. And, I was scheduled to leave on Thursday. And, I remember telling Tammy, I said, well, do you want me to stay here with you? And because they were going to do this lung cleaning and then, get her some results afterwards. She goes, no, just go ahead and go to the race. So I did. And then over the weekend, I'm, texting her, calling her, whatever, and not hearing much out of her. Cause it's like, well, how did everything go?
Right.
Oh, it was fine. Not much of anything. Right. So we get done with the Atlanta race, and I, come back, and I call her up. I said, hey, where are you at? She says, well, I'm at my doctor's appointment. I've got a doctor's appointment here, and then I've got another doctor's appointment. And I said, well, I'll meet you, at the doctor's, at St. Joe's. No, you don't need to go. And I said, no, I want to go. No, you don't have to go. So we argue about this. Finally, she tells me where she's going to be at. And so I, I drive to St. Joe's, go to the Reichert building, and sit there and wait for her. And then she, finally walks in, So we start walking around, because we're going to go to this, doctor that
Right.
that she was supposed to see. And we're walking around. I felt like we were walking around in circles. I'm like, where are we going? So finally she sat down, on a bench, and I sat there with her, and, she told me, she says, I have cancer. And I remember probably the first time in my life I broke down and cried, as a grown man. And it was devastating to hear those words out of her that she had cancer. And so then she proceeded to tell me, well, my appointment today is I'm going in to get a PET scan so they know where it is and, what they can do about it. So, so I took her in, and, she, they took her back there. They said it was going to take, I think it was going to take about an hour and a half to do everything. And, I remember leaving her there, and I, went out to my car, and I was just like, you gotta be kidding me, and so many things went through my head, like, oh, she'll be okay. This will be fine and whatever. But, about a week later, we went back and we met with her oncologist for the first time, and he came in, and, he basically just laid it out there and said, you have stage 4 metastatic lung cancer, and, most people survive anywhere from 6 to 12 months. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. And I'm devastated at this point. And I remember Tammy's like, okay, well, what do we got to do to,
to make this better,
to take care of this? And so, I saw that she was very positive about this. And I was like, okay, well then it was almost like I didn't really understand what was going on. And I don't know if it was that I didn't want to understand what was going on. I didn't want to understand what potentially she was going to be going through, because I'm like, how can this happen?
Yeah.
And unfortunately at that time, there's still the selfish part of me that is like, well, I'm still racing, and I still, I can't have this, happen right now.
Right.
And, she made it to where Tammy made everything always seem like nothing was a big deal. And she always scheduled her appointments
when you're out of town.
When I was out of town. So I really never knew how bad things were.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes I was
but that's the kind of woman that Tammy was.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Tammy was just one of those. She would light up a room when you walked in or when you called.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Because she answered. She was the office manager for years, right?
Yeah.
And I know that when I would call for you or BL and just see what what was going on for dinner or something like that, and it would be her, and she would always laugh and say, "Well, let me guess, you're gonna say outstanding again."
Yeah.
But she was always like positive, or she would look for that from somebody.
Oh, yeah. No, she always, and she always had something. She was very quick witted. She could
I was going to say,
I mean, I remember Cowboy Bob would call up back there and he would ask her, "Hey baby, what are you wearing?" And she would say, "A smile." And that was it. And that was, and it was just, and she could make him blush almost sometimes. So it was pretty cool. And, but she was just one of those that she never wanted people to worry about her or make a big deal out of her. And,
but she was also proud of you too. I'm sure that had a lot to do with it. Like, hey, listen, I don't want to be that thorn in his side. He's worked so hard to get to where he's going or where he wanted to go. Now he's there, and I don't want it to be there. I mean, I don't know. I'm not Tammy, but I'm just saying it's like there's that other side of that. She was proud of you.
She was a great lady and a caring woman, a great mother and everything. And it was like, and, you don't ever want to live your life with regrets, but I guess probably the biggest regret that I have is just not understanding how good of a human being she really was, and how much she cared about me and how much she cared about so many people out there. I never, I guess, fully really understood that until she was gone.
But Jim, you did actually understand that. Most people never, ever understand that, even when somebody is gone. You at least were smart enough and open-minded enough to realize what you had, and you learned from it.
Yeah, no, it was, it was a tough lesson for me.
How long did you have her from the time of the doctor saying that you have 6 months to a year?
Yeah, at 13 months, she made it.
Really?
So she made it longer than they thought she would make it.
Yeah.
Which I had a feeling she would.
Did she set? A lot of times people talk about they set goals for themselves. Like maybe they want to go on a certain vacation, or they want to accomplish something that they never did, or maybe that there was a wedding that they wanted to see. Was it something that Tammy wanted to be around to see?
Well, the main thing that she wanted to see was our daughter graduate from high school. And that was a goal of hers, that she was going to see Ashley graduate. And, at the beginning of 2013, in January of 2013, I really made a commitment to Tammy to try to be there for her for everything. And it really happened a little bit before that, at the end of the 2012, NHRA race season. When I got back, I told myself, I finally figured out, I said, this woman's dying in front of my eyes. And I didn't understand that before, because in my mind, I felt like, Tammy hid so many things from me about what was really going on, that I thought she was going to be just fine. But then it was going to some doctor's appointments with her in December and early January. I realized, I said, no, she's dying in front of my eyes.
Did you become an inspiration to her, a motivator for her? Like, sometimes there's a switch, and all of a sudden it's like they were that person for so long. But did you ever become that person, or was she always that strong of a person where you never really had to inspire her or motivate her or kick her in the butt?
I think she was more of an inspiration and a motivator for me than I was for her. What I was for her, really more in the end, was a whipping post. It was I was there for her to take her anger out, her frustrations out about having cancer. I was there for her to just yell at and whatever.
Yeah.
And I needed to be strong about that and not take things so personally, because I remember the one time, she was such a great lady, and she had a very hard time sleeping, the last few months of her life. And she was, on pain medication or whatever. And it was really hard for her to stay asleep the whole night. And I was a light sleeper anyway. So she always felt that she was waking me up all the time. And I remember I woke up in the morning. Well, she was in the spare bedroom sleeping. And I go in there. I said, well, what are you doing in here? She says, well, I kept waking you up, and I know how much trouble you have sleeping, so I just came in here so you can get some sleep. I said, well, I appreciate that. So we sat there and we talked, and she had told me that, she says, I think today I want to go take a drive with my car. I want to go drive around. And I said, Tammy, you can't do that, because at the time she was having these pain fits, and it was almost like seizures would come on, and she would just, these pain fits were just, I can't imagine the pain that she was going through, and it would basically take her down almost, and they would just pop up whenever. And I said, Tammy, you can't go drive and then have a pain fit. I said, because you'll get in an accident, or you'll hurt yourself or hurt somebody else, and you don't want to do that. Well, then, she proceeded to, get in my case, like how hard this was for her, that she's always been an independent woman, and she can always do things for herself. Well, now, You know, she's like, you know, I can't drive anywhere by myself. You always have to take me everywhere. She needed help taking a shower or using the bathroom, all these things. And she couldn't do these things by herself anymore. And that was tough to hear.
Yeah.
You know, that was really tough to hear out of somebody that was such a proud woman, that, you know, these simple things that we take for granted in our lives, like driving a car, or taking a shower, or using a bath, like she couldn't do these things by herself anymore.
Jimmo, listen, we are literally almost at an hour. So this is the first time that this has ever happened on my podcast. We are going to stop this podcast, and we are going to literally go right into segment 2, if you don't mind, because there is a bunch we still have to talk about, a bunch that still you need to let people know about. So if you don't mind, you're going to hang out with me for a little bit longer.
Well, yeah, I got nothing else to do, bro.
Okay, perfect. This is Johnny D, the Motivational Cowboy. That was just the first episode, and I can promise you, this episode 2 with my friend Jimmo, you don't want to miss this. He has so much more to tell you, so much more to share with you. This is Johnny D, the Motivational Cowboy, telling you, be safe, have fun, and have yourselves an outstanding day. And don't forget to visit my website at motivationalcowboy.com, and you can download all the episodes of Outstanding Life Podcast at iTunes Podcast and SoundCloud.com, Outstanding Life Podcast. We'll see you next episode right here at Outstanding Life.
Outstanding Life is a Soul Bridge Studio production.